This is tort liability for the Kansas City, Kansas School District in service. We always ask, what is tort liability? Well, it's usually to sue someone for doing something to you, or you intend to cause damage. It could be civil wrongs and addresses the duty, breach, and injury sustained to one individual as a result of another. It could also be an intentional tort, which is an offense committed by an individual who intends to do harm to another person or understands that her actions may cause harm. So, for example, if somebody says, "I'm going to kill you," and you truly believe that they are, that would be an intentional tort. Such torts are battery, which is an affliction of harm or offensive contact, an assault, which is a belief that you are going to be touched, false imprisonment, to hold someone against their will, intentional infliction of emotional distress. You see this a lot in emotional abuse cases. Also, trespassing the land is to go onto somebody's land without their permission. Trespass to chattels is to interfere with somebody's ability to use their own property. We had that when we dairy farmed. We were trying to make a horse pasture on one of the unusable parcels of land, and our neighbors thought that they could take us to court and say what we could do with our land. There's also a defamation, which are false statements to harm another person's reputation. Defending against a tort liability, well, all parties have to consent to the action, but consent doesn't count if the person isn't capable of giving us consent, such as a 5-year-old. And it doesn't count if it's given as a threat. So if you say, "You have to consent or I'm going to really beat you up," that doesn't count. How about claiming self-defense? Well, there's amount of force has to be reasonably met and not allowed to use force after the danger has passed. So you can't come back and say 2 months later, "Oh, I'm going to hurt you because you didn't abide by the rules." Also, defense of necessity, which is allowed to damage someone's property to avoid something more dangerous. So say, for instance, there's a tractor, like in this picture, and he's driving toward a light pole. What if somebody were to stop in front of him so he's not going to hit the light pole to avoid further damage down the line? That would be defending against any liability toward him. There's also negligence, damage caused by the act of not doing something they were supposed to do. So, for example, if I am not protecting a student at school, I could be sued for negligence because I was not taking care of the student, which was in my duty. Duty is not to expose others to undue harm. Breach, unreasonable harm for not doing what a person was supposed to do. So that would be a breach of my contract if I did not keep the student out of harm's way. There's also causation, which is breaching the duty that caused harm. How about damages? Well, damages could be paid for medical or nominal damages or punitive damages. There's also the assumption of risk. You agree to accept the risk of harm, agreeing to do something that harm may happen, and recklessly acting without thinking. For example, someone who is drinking drunk is taking the risk of being sued for recklessness because they willingly knew that getting into a vehicle after having some drinks would cause some harm. Well, there are some people that are immune to any kind of tort litigation. Children cannot sue their parents before they're 18. Many, many years ago, there was a movie where a young child wanted to divorce his parents. It wasn't exactly suing the parents, but it was taking them to court because they were underage. It was a very funny movie. You can only sue the government if a law is passed for special circumstances, and you can only sue an employer for the damages that were done during the employment. Can schools be held liable for safety of students? Well, according to MSD of Martinsville versus Rebecca Jackson, this ruling shows schools or districts can be found liable if evidence proves that the event could have reasonably been prevented either because officials had reason to believe it would have taken place or if their response protocol wasn't sufficiently implemented. So pretty much, teachers who have been notified of a situation involving students are required to report them to the administration, whether they think it's just a little gag, whether it's happened in class and it's repeatedly, it needs to be reported. And even if a school has a safety protocol, it's hard to force people to have scripted emergency responses without taking split-second judgments into account. And so if someone gets hurt and it's not necessarily something for which a school or district is liable. And an example of this would be the case of Sandy Hook Elementary in December of 2012. They had safety protocols in place where doors were locked, but the shooter shot through the front door and proceeded to go after students that were in the school. Harassment. It's a discriminatory harassment may take many forms. It could be verbal acts, name calling, nonverbal behavior such as graphic and written statements, or conduct that is physically threatening, harmful, or humiliating, among others. School districts are to take action against any harassment that is brought to their attention, and they must provide training to students, parents, and employees so that they know to report any discrimination or harassment. Schools should have many very explicit policies and procedures that are accessible and clearly reflect laws and the OCR guidance to avoid litigation. What's the school's responsibility? Well, for schools, we are here to protect students from harm that creates a climate of fear, which can interfere with a student's education, leading to a range of outcomes from failing courses to, worst case scenario, suicides. This is true in bullying in schools, whether online or offline, and includes topics such as gender, sex, race, age, disability, color, creed, national origin, religion, or genetic information. This also includes any off-site extracurricular events for sports, music, or field trips. School personnel need to maintain the relationship with their students and not rely on outside sources to be doing their duty. Schools have a legal duty to take reasonable action to provide and maintain a safe environment for students. And if they do so, they cannot be held responsible for any and every injury that might occur. What about suicide? This was a really good example. Beam versus Western Wayne School District in 2018, where in 2008, a high school student in Pennsylvania's Western Wayne School District was diagnosed with ADHD. He also had an IEP, which was in the section of 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and he had accommodations in place. Mainly was communication with the parents. When the student had a failing grade and what the parents were not notified, the student was extremely agitated. And not long after receiving failing grades in the third grading period, this student expressed suicidal thoughts to his therapist. In that case, the therapist was trying to work through with the student, but the therapist also should have notified parents or school on what was happening, not with great detail, but to contact them to see if they knew what was going on. To qualify for monetary damages under Section 504, the parents would have to show that the student was denied services or accommodations intentionally or deliberately. The district court found that there was no sufficient evidence to allow the case to continue. The Kansas City, Kansas School District has many board policies regarding the issues that we have been going over in this PowerPoint. The first one is bullying. The Board of Education, in its commitment to provide a positive and productive learning and working environment for its students and staff, are in accordance with state law. They prohibit bullying in any form by any staff, student, or parents towards a student or staff member, including electronic means on or while using school property, in a school vehicle, or at a school-sponsored activity or event. It also includes racial and disability harassment. The Board of Education is extremely committed to making sure that there is no racial and disability harassment. In our school district, we have over 55 languages. That encompasses many different races, and we also have varying ranges of disabilities. They take their dedication to student safety very, very seriously. Board policies are online, they're posted in schools, and they are published in student handbooks and parent handbooks. If you have any other questions, these are the resources that were used for this presentation.